everyone. And as you can see, we are going to be starting a brief but important aspect of prelims geography, which is more relevant to probably the questions in the paper, because these are contemporary topics, day to day, more, for today's situation, especially. And therefore, we begin with what we call as climatology. So, geography is made up of several components. In school, you just study geography, but actually, that's okay now. Yeah. So, uh, I'm going to be talking about a very important topic called climatology, and geography is actually made up of several components. And if you do degree geography, then you learn new terms like study about the landforms is called geomorphology, then study about the oceans is called oceanography. So climatology, study of the climate and so on. So these are the main physical parts of geography. And you also have the biological parts, which is all about the living things, where you have the natural vegetation, wildlife, and the different people who live in different parts of the country and so on, of the world rather. And why do they live like that, and why what they eat, and how they, carry out their livelihood and things like that. And then when you combine the physical and the biological aspect, then we also have a special, this thing of a branch of geography, which is called as environmental geography. So since the environment today is very important in terms of whatever is happening, and we need to understand why it is happening, how it is happening, before jumping to conclusions and getting the wrong information. So I've chosen this important topic, which is climatology, which is what is the about the atmosphere, right? So the atmosphere around us, and we are going to look at the composition of the atmosphere. Very important to understand what the atmosphere is made of and what is the role of each of these things in the atmosphere. Then we also look at the structure of the atmosphere. So it's just not the air around us at our level, but even at higher levels that is affecting us. And then we have properties, right? So let's look at first some definitions. So since we are using the word climate, what do we actually mean by the word climate? I'm sure all of you have studied this in school, and you would have studied that is the average weather conditions of the atmosphere, and I add to that and say it is in terms of temperature and rainfall. So when we look at the weather conditions, we take the two important elements, which is temperature and rainfall, and we also move further and say that this is for a very long period of time. Okay, generally 20 to 25 years for temperature. In the past, it used to be 100 years standard for everything. But today, since temperature is rising very quickly and changing very quickly, many countries take a 20-year gap, a 20-year average, or a 25-year average, depending on where they are and depending on how many changes they've been able to notice. So since things are changing very fast, we normally take temperature readings for about 20 to 25 years and then find out the average. Then it's about 100 years for rainfall. Now, rainfall is something that's very like erratic. It may come, it may not come. The clouds come, but then we do not have rainfall. So therefore, we the what do you call the what do you call variability in the rainfall is so much that just taking it for 20 to 25 years is not enough. So we normally take rainfall data for the last 100 years and then arrive at whether a place has a lot of rainfall or does not have rainfall. Like that you go to a desert, right? A desert is a desert because the rainfall is less. And that is a 100-year statistic, average of 100 years. Uh, for the time being now, I will not talk about how you arrive at these averages, but later on, if we have time, we can do. What is more important is that we need to look at a 100-year average. We can't say, oh, last year it was like this, and therefore this year it should be like that, right? There are many states in India that who say that 7th of June and the rain should come, 14th of June and the rain should come, and it does not come. So these are not predictable dates. These are not predictable times also, because things are changing so much. So we need to look at data over the last 100 years and then arrive at conclusions as to what is happening, why it is happening, how much can we expect rainfall to happen, and so on and so forth. Then, of course, you know about weather. Weather is basically just the actual condition of the atmosphere. And when I say that, then it is only for a short period of time, right? And this time period is as short as within a few hours. So morning it may have been nice and bright, but then by mid morning or afternoon, you'll find it becomes cloudy. Then by evening, it starts to rain, right? So these are all weather conditions, right, that are changing within a day. Or they may not change at all for a long period of time, a longer period, like a few days or a few weeks, like it happens in India. So in India, when we do our seasons, it's not summer, autumn, winter, and spring. It's basically the amount of sunlight that we have, the temperature of the day, what has been the general weather conditions. So we look at weather conditions rather than we are looking at whether it is hot or cold or spring or autumn or increasing temperature, decreasing temperature. So Indian weather, I mean, if you take the seasons of India, it's totally different. It is only based on weather. But if you see the seasons in Europe, for example, then they are standard. Summer, you have summer, then followed by that is sorry, after summer you have autumn, then autumn you have winter, and then winter goes to spring and back to summer. So there is this season and it does not change. Whereas in India, it's a different story altogether, right? So that's the sum total for climate and weather. Now let's look at the elements of weather and climate. So most important element, that is what is, when we talk about weather and climate, what are we talking about? We first talk about is the temperature of the air. This is the starting point. This is the reason why everything is happening. So if temperatures increase, what happens is that the air becomes hot. And if the air is hot, it tends to rise up. That's a physics. In physics, you know that anything that's hot tends to rise up. So when the air is rising up, it means that there is less air on the ground. And therefore, if there is less air on the ground, therefore you'll find that the pressure will drop. So atmospheric pressure will become less when temperature rises and vice versa. So when it's cold, the air is denser and therefore it settles down and the atmospheric pressure also increases. Okay, we will be redoing all these concepts in a little more detail later, right, or specifically in these topics. But this is just to know that one, what are the elements, and they're not something that's separate. They're all related to each other. So temperature is the starting point, and temperature leads to changes in atmospheric pressure. Now, what happens when the atmospheric pressure decreases, right? So when the atmospheric pressure decreases, we have air moving from high pressure to low pressure, and that's the wind. So the wind is, when you see a wind, if you feel a wind blowing, immediately you know that you can actually identify where the low pressure area is. Because if the wind is in your face, blowing in your face, that means the low pressure area is behind you. And I'm not talking about the wind when you're sitting in a car or a bus. That is displaced air, that is not wind. When it's just like when you're still and you're sitting on outside, you're on the grounds or on the terrace or in a balcony, so you can identify the wind. And you can also look at the clouds to identify the direction in which the winds are blowing. So the wind is created mainly because of the difference in atmospheric pressure. So as we know, we will study later how temperatures vary from place to place based on a variety of factors. And that is why atmospheric pressure also varies from place to place, creating the wind. Now the wind brings in clouds, right? So the clouds don't come by themselves, except in the equatorial region and for a short time in India. Like what the season that we have now is when we have, because of the excessive heat, whatever little moisture is there is rising up and is condensing to form the clouds. So the clouds come are in these areas, they mainly are created in one place. But most important for India, we say is southwest monsoon, as I'm sure you're aware of that term. So the southwest monsoon is basically brought in by the southwest monsoon wind. So the wind brings the clouds. And what will clouds bring? Clouds bring rain, they'll bring snow, right? and therefore that's the precipitation. Now, the precipitation, once it rains, and once, of course, snow, of course, will not cause humidity, but when there is rain, especially, then the humidity increases, right? Humidity is the amount of moisture in air. It's not a very important topic for the prelims, but we just need to know a little bit about it, which if I have time, I will stress on that later. But humidity is just the amount of moisture in air at a particular point of time. And we normally, talk about humidity in terms of percentage. So if you're from Bangalore, your humidity is always a little less in Bangalore. But if you move to Chennai, which is on the same latitude, if you move either to Chennai or to Mangalore, you will find that you will feel the humidity more because your perspiration, your sweat is not drying up. In Bangalore, you don't feel you're sweating a lot. That's because it's drying up. But you are sweating equally because the body needs to maintain its temperature. And therefore, in such a situation, it releases the excess moisture, which is why whether you are in Bangalore or you are in Mangalore or you are in Chennai, you need to drink plenty of water. So your 2 liters of water is very important because only then your body will remain cool. Otherwise, you will find that your temperature will increase, you will feel uncomfortable, and so on and so forth, right? And that is humidity. And only, yeah, so then of all these things, so when I like to just continue, sorry, I'll just continue a little bit more. So when it rains, what happens? The temperature comes down. If the temperatures come down, then your atmospheric pressure will increase and you will have a high pressure. Once you have a high pressure, there will be no wind. And because of rise in temperature, the clouds disappear and you will have no rain, right? And if you don't have rain, that means the sun will shine. If the sun shines, temperature will rise. So there is a very close relationship between these five elements, that is temperature, atmospheric pressure, wind, clouds, and precipitation. Humidity will play a role in the amount of rainfall you will get. So, and also the what you call the time at which you will get rainfall. So if you have more of humidity, then obviously the clouds, when they come and they pick up more moisture because there's more humidity around you, then you will find that they will become heavier, they'll become denser, and they will drop their moisture and you will have rain. But if you have less humidity, the clouds will just pass by and you will not get rainfall. Mostly you will not get rainfall in that area, right? So that's very important. And the reason why you may say, like, rainfall in Bangalore is less is not because of humidity in terms of sweating and just like that. It is because of lack of transpiration, because the trees have been cut down. So trees play a very important role in maintaining the humidity of the atmosphere. Okay. Again, I will talk about this a bit later when we talk about more of the environmental aspects, what you need to know in prelims geography. Right. So for all, if you look at all these elements, only temperature and precipitation values are quantifiable. Quantifiable meaning to say they are measurable, right? So what I mean by measurable in the sense that, for example, temperature is degrees Celsius. So I can take a thermometer and I can take the temperature. Now the temperature is not going to suddenly increase or suddenly decrease, right? The temperature of natural air doesn't suddenly increase or suddenly decrease. It increases gradually, right? Except in like unusual circumstances what we are having nowadays, especially in North America and Northern Europe, is where when you have an Arctic blast, where the wind or air mass is just leaving the Arctic region and flowing down towards the temperate regions wherever you have Canada, USA, and the European countries, and that is why we have a sudden drop in temperature. But otherwise, in normal circumstances, the temperature of air rises or drops slowly, right? So when that happens, so therefore we know we can, and we can use a thermometer and get the readings, right? So it is measured either in degrees Celsius or Fahrenheit. Atmospheric pressure is just the weight of the air on the ground. So we just say it is so many millibars, right? And therefore, that is keeps on changing. So temperature of air increases, then you will find that the atmospheric pressure may decrease. But we do not, this keeps on changing, because when the wind blows, then the atmospheric pressure is balanced, right? Again, when you take wind is only like so many kilometers or miles per hour, and so on and so forth. And it is not a constant thing. So the wind we may have a light breeze, or you may have a strong breeze and suddenly it disappears. So there is no constancy about it, right? Temperature is always, in the summer, it will keep rising, then it will start to come down slowly, 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 like that. So there is a gradation to it. Then clouds, as you know, sometimes the clouds are there for the whole sky, sometimes it's not there. So they don't have a quantifiable quantity. We normally use the word octa for clouds, right? So if 50% of the, and we say 50% of the sky is covered with clouds, then we say it is 4 octa, because we normally take a circle of 8 parts, and that 8 parts. So the fourth part, if four parts are covered completely, we say 4 octa. So 4 octa is your cloud cover. And so it's not really a quantity that, and you cannot go on looking at the sky and saying now it is 1, now it is 8, now it is 2, like that. It is like, it is, it's not really, it's quality. And it's quality also because if the clouds are white, that means they are fair weather clouds, they will not give you rainfall. And if they are dark color clouds only, then you will have rain, right? Then precipitation, yes, you can quantify it. You can just collect the amount of rainfall using a scientific instrument known as a rain gauge, though it is a very crude measurement, but you can collect it and you can find out what is the amount of rainfall a place has received. And then you can take that rainfall for that particular day, for the that particular week, for the month, for the year, and the data can be collected. So data collection wise, it is easy for us to collect data in terms of temperature and precipitation. Humidity, like I told you, it all depends on the condition. So if temperature of the air is more, and if you're living in a coastal area, humidity is going to be high. If you're living in an interior area, humidity is going to be less. But then if the clouds come in and you get rainfall, then humidity increases. So it's just a percentage of water vapor in the atmosphere. And therefore, again, you can quantify it, but it's more of quality. We use the word more, less, very humid, like that, those terms, right? And therefore, we normally consider only temperature and precipitation as the most important values or data to be collected when we are identifying the climate of a place, or even yeah, not weather, right? So therefore climate is defined according to the fixed values of temperature and precipitation, and computed as averages according to the month, days, for initially days and then months, and then you have an average for each month, and then you have an average for the year, right? Now, why is this important for us to understand? Most of you know that we are going into global warming and temperatures are rising. And the temperature rise is actually very, very small. It's only 1 degree Celsius, they say. But this 1 degree Celsius is actually an average of an average of an average. It's not really the actual temperature. As we know here ourselves, like May, April has been a very hot month for Bangalore, if you're staying here in Bangalore, right? Or even most of the other parts. So May is supposed to be the hottest month, but this time you'll find April has already become very hot. March was hot, right? So actual temperatures every day may be really high. And that's what you can also look at, right? When you're looking at temperature values. So when you're looking at, so therefore you take an average and then you say that the average for Bangalore was 30 degrees, but this year the temperature has crossed the average. So we have a base level that we take, right? And that is also calculated as an average. So it's an average of an average of an average, right? For example, you take the average daily temperature for a month of April. So your 30 days, you divide it by 30, you get the average for April. Then you get the average for each of the months, say for 2021. And then you have take the average for the last 20 years, and then again find the average. So that becomes the average temperature of a particular place in that particular month. So that's how for the month of April, you calculate it for 20 years, or if you want, you can calculate. So you can do a lot of it, lot of what you call statistical analysis with all this data. So it is important for us to realize that. So when they are saying 1 degree, is actually it's much more, and much more in some areas than other areas. Right. So I'm going to show you a picture now, and you can. I don't know how many of you are here. You can tell me, what does this show? What does this picture show? From whatever I have told you now, what does this picture show? Any one of you? These pictures that we have here, what do they show?
Seasons.
Yes?
Monsoon. Monsoons, ma'am. Monsoons represents monsoon.
Monsoon? All the pictures? No, I
Seasons.
asked you about whatever we have done, weather and climate. So what is being depicted here? Is it weather or is it climate?
Climate, ma'am.
Weather.
Weather, that's right. So that's how the weather is. For example, if you take that first picture, sun is shining. Okay, this. Of course, we don't have the third picture, that is the snowy one here in India. But if you take the first one on the right, the northeast corner, then you will find that it is shining. So temperature rises, right, and then come down to the southeast. The wind comes in, and the wind may bring clouds, and the clouds then bring rain, right? And this can happen in 1 day, right? And it can happen for a number of days, like we are supposed to be having April showers now, right? Lightning, thunder, and rainfall, especially in the afternoons, followed by hail. So you can say, yes, it is cold also. You may have hail also at this season, right? And they are called as mango showers or blossom showers in India. So these are all weather conditions, right? Describing weather. So you say it's a sunny day, you say it's a cloudy day or a stormy day, windy day, a cold day, right? You use these terms, and these are only qualitative terms. These are not quantitative terms, right? But if I take temperature and rainfall, then look at it for the whole world, then I have climatic types. So straight away here, I have the world map here. If you see the climate in the extreme left, it says tropical. So the tropical climate is basically completely wet. Wet tropical, actually what you learn as equatorial. Okay, then you have tropical wet and dry, which is India. If you can see, India is actually tropical wet and dry. Okay, and so that's how. And then in India, you can see a yellow right across in the center. That is actually humid tropical, but actually it is dry. Okay, and humid tropical means that you have um, rainfall in winter also. Okay, those areas also get rainfall in winter from the northeast monsoon. So you see the world as such, it is divided into climatic zones, right? Based on the collection of data, which is temperature and rainfall, right, over a long period of time. So when I say equatorial climate, most of you know equatorial climate means it will rain every day. It's very high temperatures. Average temperatures are 29 degrees throughout the year, always hot, and it is always wet. So it's called tropical wet, which is, this is a new term, but then basically it is equatorial. So all along the Amazon, if you know South America, you know where South America here is on your left. You have there, you can see the green patch, that's the Amazon basin, right? And that is where it is always hot and always wet. Of course, the rainfall is disappearing because we have cut down the trees, right? So Brazil especially has lost its rainfall in the Amazon region, mainly because all the trees have been just demolished, just taken off. And therefore, when you take off the trees, remember, they play a very important role. So if you look at this, that is climatic types. So you don't use the term climate like today's climate is very bad. No, you say today's weather is very bad. But then you say, yes, climate is changing in many parts of the world. Equatorial region is becoming a desert. Then that is a climatic change, mainly because the rainfall is decreasing because of man's activities. But will it really become a desert? No, because we have winds that are blowing into this region that are bringing the clouds. Of course, the clouds are not bringing enough rainfall, but whatever little rainfall they are coming, you are sure to get some rainfall or the other. It cannot become an absolute desert like the Sahara Desert. So the Sahara Desert is a desert for a different reason. No winds blow into the Sahara Desert. So if no winds come, that means there's hardly any rain. They have local like air difference in air pressures that create thunderstorms and some rainfall, but otherwise it is absolutely like a desert. No, rainfall is less than 25 centimeters. Where it's more than 1200 centimeters of rainfall in the Amazon basin, it's only 25 centimeters here. So here is where we look at climate and climatic types, right? So the idea of showing you all this is for you to understand that we need to study about the atmosphere in a little more detail so that you understand why and how all these changes are happening, and we don't make mistakes in our judgment. If tomorrow you are all going to be IAS officers and you're going to make decisions, and you need to know what you're working with, right? And you need to know the what you mean by the climatic condition, especially that of India. But like it is India alone, you can't say, oh, I will only study India and I will not study the rest of the world. It doesn't work like that, because today we know that the climate of India is depending on what is happening in the Indian Ocean, in the South Indian Ocean, not even in the northern parts, right? South of equator. What is happening in the south of the Indian Ocean? What is happening not only here, but in the East Pacific Ocean? Something happens in the Pacific Ocean that completely changes the air pressure system and takes away the southwest monsoon. And that's when we have the El Nino effect. And that's when we have a failure in the monsoon. So we need to look at a bigger picture, right? And that is why it is very important for you to understand that the bigger picture here, which is why I've chosen the subject for climatology, right? So let's move on to the atmosphere. So this is the atmosphere from space, and you can easily see that it's covered with clouds, and you have that blue color there, right? I'm sure some of you will know why we have that blue. Why do we have that blue? Somebody's painted it blue, or what? Any idea
Oil,
why?
oceans, ma'am. Because of
Oh,
oceans.
that is the outside. Does water have any color?
No, ma'am.
No. So the water is just reflecting the light, the color of the sky. So there is something happening in the sky that is called as scattering. So the sky is made of, or the air is made up of many molecules of air, right? So when we have the incoming, you would have done this in physics, where you take what you call a disk.
Prism.
Yes, not a prism. Yeah, the prism effect is a rainbow effect. I'm not talking of, but the rainbow colors in a disk. You have all the colors in a disk, the Vibgyor, and then you turn the disk right at a great speed. What happens? All the colors disappear, and you have white. So what's the this thing of the moral of that experiment? What you need to know is that white light is actually made up of 7 colors, right? Now, the prism effect is when the white light, when it goes through the 7 colors, through the prism, it is then broken down into the 7 colors. So the prism acts as a kind of medium to break down the white light into 7 colors. But in the atmosphere as such, we just have very tiny molecules of air. So when the sunlight comes in, the all the other colors are absorbed. Only the blue light is reflected. And that is why the sky is blue. And that is why it looks blue right across the world, especially during the daytime, because it is known as scattering. That process is known as scattering. But when the sun is setting, then the blue sort of disappears and it becomes yellow and then becomes orange and becomes red. So then the reason is because near us, close to us, is a lot of dust in the atmosphere. There's a lot of water vapor. Through the day, people are moving, the wind is blowing, dust is picked up, then you have more of evaporation happening. So the content of the atmosphere close to us as the sun is setting or rising is dense. And that is why the prismatic effect of the sunlight then changes it from blue to all the other colors, right? So if you're ever in a dry place like the deserts, you will find that you have fantastic colors just before the sun sets and even after it, till it reaches to about 18 degrees below the horizon. And that is because of the prismatic effect of all the dust particles and the water molecules that you have. And of course, we also have the greater amount of gases also at the lower levels, right? And we'll discuss that a little later. Okay, so that's your atmosphere from space. Now, to describe it, all of you know that it's an envelope of air surrounding the Earth. It is a blue transparent blanket. Now, the height is about 600 kilometers above the Earth. This is an average height. It's not the same everywhere. In the equatorial regions, it's higher because the temperature is higher. And in the polar regions, it's lower because the temperatures are lower. So it's more dense and compact, right? And beyond that, it just merges into space where you have a vacuum. But the thickness, like I said, varies from time to time depending on the season. So hot season, higher the temperatures, the atmosphere will expand, right? And especially in the lower atmosphere around us, okay? And as the temperatures decrease, then the air contracts. Now, why is this important for us to understand? You all know that we have the ozone layer, a hole in the ozone layer, and it's more in the polar regions. So it's more in the polar regions and it's affecting those areas more is mainly because the atmosphere there is very, very thin. Okay, so where it is 18 kilometers above us, I'll talk to you about that in detail. It's only about 8 kilometers over the polar region. So it's very close to the Earth's surface. And therefore, you'll find that the ozone hole there, if there is a hole there, that's why it is being affected. People there are being affected. The polar ice cap is affected, and so on and so forth. So the thickness is very important for us to understand, right? And of course, when it is summer, then it tends to temperatures will rise and the air will expand. That's physics again, right? And when it is cold, then the air condenses. Okay, so that's how it changes. And it also depends from place to place. So as you go to higher altitudes, you will find that after 3000 meters, you will begin to find a shortness of breath. It's not the coronavirus, it is just the effect of the altitude. Okay, and there is less air. And if there's less air, it means there's less oxygen. And that is why you will have a breathing difficulty, right? So as you go up, the amount of air is less, right? And it varies. And that is what I said, like most of the air, 80% of the air, 90% of the air is in the lower atmosphere, of which 70% is below 3000 meters, right? So therefore, that's the thickness that varies from place to place, right? Now, atmosphere is a blanket. So what does a blanket do? Basically, the blanket keeps you warm, right? And therefore, we have things in the atmosphere that keep us warm. That is carbon dioxide and water vapor. And how do they keep you warm? They absorb the heat radiated from the Earth's surface. So we have the incoming solar radiation, right? So there's a picture here. So the incoming rays of the sun, they come in and then they heat up the Earth's surface. This is very important for us to understand that the Earth's surface must become hot for the air around us to become hot, right? And then it is because we have things like carbon dioxide and we also have other things around us now, like methane and ozone and sulfur dioxide and nitrous oxide and so on and so forth. So those are also greenhouse gases and they increase the temperature of a place. So all that heat is sort of trapped at the lower levels, right? And then as it goes up, as the sun sets and the temperature sun disappears, then all this, the heat is lost. When the heat is lost and the earth cools down, all this disappears. So this greenhouse effect has an effect of about 3 weeks. So when the incoming sunlight comes in and heats up the land, the air remains warm for about 3 weeks till the immediate air around you remains around you for around 3 weeks till it becomes absolutely cool because it rises up very slowly and then it disappears. In the meantime, sun has come back the next day again heated up another parcel of air, a land and then a parcel of air. And so it is a cumulative effect, right? So that's what we have. So that's what we need to understand, that if you increase these gases, then definitely the temperature of the air around you is going to increase. Yes. And the major reason why we are having more of carbon dioxide is not just burning of fossil fuels, but the removal of trees. So where the trees have been, they should just have remained there, and development should have somehow come up around those trees, right? So we need to bring that tree cover back if we have to actually, work with reducing the amount of carbon, because trees take in a whole lot of carbon dioxide. So this is the earth as a blanket. Now, I also need to mention that it is only on earth that we have this thick atmosphere, and on another planet, which is Venus. Now, Venus has a thick atmosphere, but it is mainly made up of sulfuric acid gas. And sulfuric acid gas is about 20,000 times, I think, more powerful than your carbon dioxide. If you say carbon dioxide as one in terms of power, then methane has a power of 20 times more than carbon dioxide. Ozone, sulfuric acid, and all are 1,000 times more powerful as greenhouse gases, right? So when you're releasing nitrous oxide from your cars and so on and so forth, you're actually adding a much higher greenhouse gas, right? Which is where we need to have a combined effect of trying to grow more trees, maintain the tree environment, as well as, reduce the carbon footprint in terms of, or not really carbon footprint, but let me say greenhouse gas footprint, by reducing the vehicles on the road. So the electrical vehicles, they are saying, yes, it's a good thing that you bring in electrical vehicles because they will not produce that much of greenhouse gas. But in India, 65% of electricity is generated from burning coal. And when you burn coal, you have carbon dioxide. So that is why many fingers are pointed to us, saying that we are responsible for it because of our large population, because of the amount of coal we use, and all that, right? But the story is very simple. If we at least maintain that 100% of whatever amount of local tree cover, your carbon dioxide levels will actually come down, because there is a whole lot of carbon dioxide that is not accountable, not seen around us, right? And they notice in the northern hemisphere, there's less carbon dioxide than the southern hemisphere. So what's different between northern hemisphere and southern hemisphere is that the tree cover is huge in the northern hemisphere. You have a whole lot of coniferous trees, you have the equatorial region, lots of trees in every continent, right? Except in the south. So you have less number of trees there. You have less land in the south. So naturally, the tree cover is less. But the population is more, like Australia, right? In terms of like releasing more of everybody having a vehicle, everybody using lots of electricity for lots of things, right? And therefore, you will find that their carbon dioxide emissions are more. Whereas the trees in our area, the northern hemisphere, are still absorbing a lot of the carbon dioxide. In spite of that, we are having issues with reference to carbon dioxide, right? So we need to look at this as holistically in order to understand it, right? So that's a warming effect of the atmosphere. Then the atmosphere is a protector. Now this is because the ozone layer is protecting the atmosphere from the dangerous UV rays. Now what does the ozone layer do? The ozone layer actually absorbs the rays. So here is the ozone layer. So the ozone here absorbs the ultraviolet rays of the sun. So the sunlight is not really only made up of 7 colors. You also have what we call as the UV rays before the violet, right? And the infrared rays after the red. So this UV rays are extremely hot. And fortunately for us, nature provided us with a layer in the second layer of the Earth's atmosphere, and that absorbs the carbon dioxide. So initially it is oxygen, right? So oxygen absorbs the ozone, the UV rays, and breaks down into 2 oxygen radicals. So we have oxygen is O2, so we have O plus O, and then The remaining oxygen combines with the one more O and makes ozone. And that's why by the time you reach 35 kilometers from our surface above, you have a thick layer of ozone. So here is where we have the ozone protecting us because it absorbs the ultraviolet rays of the sun. And we also have what we call as a zone above these, the second layer. So the first layer is, maybe you already know this, is stratosphere, then, sorry, troposphere, then you have the stratosphere, and then you have the mesosphere. So in the mesosphere is where all these meteorites burn out. By the time they come in full speed, they completely burn out, and that meteorite zone is the mesosphere. And that protects us from the, so that's a protection we have. Of course, a few very large ones hit the earth. They've hit the earth in the past. We know that the glacial period about 2 million years ago, that's when the dinosaurs died out, is not because of man's activity, but because of a meteor that hit us, and then a whole lot of dust flew up in the atmosphere. And that this dust prevented the light of the sun from reaching the ground. So the ground didn't get hot. And because the ground did not get hot, the air did not get hot, and temperatures started to decrease. So when temperatures start to decrease, the plants will start to die out because plants require a specific temperature, a minimum temperature of 6 degrees Celsius. So if you go anywhere below 6 degrees Celsius, then no plants grow. So all the herbivores were the first to die out. Of course, the plants die out first, then the herbivores, and then the carnivores, right? And the carnivores then eat each other, and they also die out. So it was over a long period of time, about 65 million years ago is when the dinosaurs died out. And how life has changed over the earth is also because of the various ice ages created because of meteorites, basically, right? And so therefore today we also have the concept of global dimming. It's not only global warming, we also have the concept of global dimming, but it hasn't come into the IAS syllabus. So we will talk about that later. Just because we have more of particulate matter in the, we'll be doing that now. So we can go into this. So yeah, then the atmosphere is a life giver. I think all of you know this, right? Oxygen and how we get oxygen, right? So the oxygen because, so how did we first get oxygen? We first got oxygen from the atmosphere, which is only made up of carbon dioxide. And then we have the first algae that comes from in the sea. From the sea, then it moves to the land and it just takes in all the carbon dioxide. It retains the carbon and release the oxygen. Okay. And that became the beginning of the growing of trees. So that is why we need to plant trees, because they are going to take in as much carbon dioxide. So the more carbon dioxide they get, the faster they are going to grow, the better they are going to grow than trees that do not get that much carbon dioxide. Okay. And they do this, of course, only in the presence of sunlight. So at night, that's why they say don't sleep under the trees at night, because they are also become like us. They are generating carbon dioxide. So only in the presence of sunlight, right, do trees then give out oxygen. And we are just cutting them down left, right, and center. I don't know if you know this, that in Madhya Pradesh, I think Bhopal or Ranchi, one of those places, when patients were discharged after being on oxygen, they were actually given on their prescription, go out and plant more trees because we need more oxygen. It really makes sense that that's how we can get our oxygen, just by deep breathing and breathing good air, clean air. And that's what they were asked to also do, which is a brilliant thought by whichever doctor is running that particular hospital, right? Yeah, so that's your carbon dioxide. Secondly, the most important factor is nitrogen. Now, what is nitrogen? Nitrogen actually is got from lightning, and it has been there in the atmosphere, but lightning has sort of creates the nitrogen in the atmosphere. And when you have nitrogen in the atmosphere, then when it rains, this slightly nitric acid then reaches the soil. And then, of course, all the things that grow require the nitrogen and they convert it into what you call as protein, and it's all important for cells and so on and so forth. And therefore, you'll find that that's how we have nitrogen. And then it's released back into the atmosphere, right? Do you know which plant or whatever you know needs lots of nitrates? Do you know?
Phytoplanktons.
Yes, phytoplankton.
Uh,
No, no.
yeah.
But some very important. If I use the word crop, probably you will know. What crop requires lots of nitrogen, nitrates?
Ground.
Wheat.
I can't hear you.
Wheat.
Wheat, yes, that's right. So that is why it's good to grow groundnuts. Groundnut brings back the nitrogen to the soil or nitrates to the soil, right? And that's why they're called leguminous plants. So nitrogen very important for growing our crops. Most of the crops require lots of nitrates, which is a fertilizer that can be given naturally, right? And that's the importance of nitrogen. So it maintains the food balance for us indirectly. Okay, right. Now, the composition of the atmosphere. So here is where at various levels, the composition changes. Like you see, like I already told you, near the earth, we have lots of water vapor, we have dust, sand, we have haze. Haze, of course, is like a mist only. Okay, it's water vapor only, right? And as you go higher, then you have the entire atmosphere has a combination of nitrogen, oxygen, carbon dioxide, and other gases. That's the entire atmosphere. And as you go higher, then nitrogen disappears, carbon dioxide disappears at 90 kilometers, oxygen disappears at 120 kilometers, and then you have at 35 kilometers, you have a concentration of ozone, right? So this lower part of the atmosphere, starting from that oxygen, carbon dioxide and all, is called as the homosphere. Of course, it's called homosphere right up to mesosphere, right up to about 120, 80, yeah, 80 kilometers up. 80 to 100 kilometers up, it's called as the homosphere, after which it all separates out into separate molecules, right? And then it's called as heterosphere, right? So this is a mixture of gases, and you know what you have, right? So mixture of gases, you know that 78% is nitrogen, 21% is oxygen, and 1% is all the other gases. Now, key in all these, as you can see on your the table, sometimes they will give you this table just by leaving some of them and say in terms of percentages. They used to do this before for the prelim exam, which is the highest, which is the lowest to ascending order, descending order, right? It's a bit difficult to remember, but and we can't really create a kind of a, you can create some kind of an acronym here where you can use the first letters and know that this is in decreasing order. So ACNH, MKH, like that. You can just mug it all up, right? So that's the order. Quantities they may not give. Of course, if they're want to make it very tough, they may give you in terms of percentage. But what I want you to look at here is the amount of carbon dioxide we have with reference to oxygen and nitrogen. It is less than 0.036%, which is actually nothing. If I gave you that mark in the examination, you would probably say, what is this? How did I get such marks? Right? It's ridiculous. But this small quantity is what is running whatever systems, living systems we have on the earth. This is the base of all life, and whatever is happening is just that small percentage, right? And we are able to live and breathe and get whatever we need only because of such a small percentage. And when we are going out toward development, we're only thinking of buildings and roads and how many cars I have and AC and blah, 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 all that, right? And just demolishing the trees left, right, and center, which is they are the only ones that brought down carbon dioxide levels from 99% to 0.036%. So when the Earth was first formed 4.6 billion years ago, of course, gas state then, maybe a billion, 10, 100 billion years later, you'll find that not 100 billion, sorry, 10 million, I think it was in about 260 million years ago, is when the trees began to grow on Earth. and they took in as much of the carbon dioxide and released the oxygen. Oxygen levels went up to almost 26%, and then they came down and they stabilized at 21%. And then that is when man has made his entry on the surface of the earth, right? And in a short period of time, like when man came in, maybe over 1.5 lakh million years ago, after he has come in a short period of development from 1900s onwards, like 1800, sorry, 1875, 77 is when industrialization happened. But right from then, you will find that they just cut down the trees and just put in buildings, and they have sort of, in a matter of 200 years, just completely changed the composition of the air by increasing the amount of carbon. So if I, with a value of 0.03%, the average temperature of the whole earth is just 17 degrees Celsius. But if I increase that, double it, it is going to become an average of 34. Average of 30, 34 means that your tropical areas will become extremely hot, and the polar areas will completely be ice free. So we are the ones who are like increasing the amount of carbon dioxide just because we are cutting down trees. I always say you can have your cars and everything else, but you try and maintain some trees around. Wood is very important. It has to be wood, not crops. Crops don't take in carbon dioxide, right? It is the woody thing that we require, right? And not only does it take in, not only are these trees taking in carbon dioxide, if you when you go around next time, you see the color of the trees, the trunk of the trees in Bangalore, they've all turned black. And why have they turned black is because they are taking in whatever air they are getting. They don't say, oh, I will take only pure air or clean air. No, that leaves are taking in whatever improper, impure air, whatever air they are taking it in. So if it is polluted air and it has soot in it, it has whatever in it, all that is being absorbed. It's being absorbed from the roots also because the soot falls on the ground, right? And soot is burnt carbon, and that falls on the ground. So all that pollution is being absorbed by the trees. And yet every March you can see every tree blooming so well in spite of being so polluted. So here is where we need to learn a lesson. We need to respect that environment. We need to keep that tree around somehow or the other. We, tomorrow you will all be building your own homes, and if you can build your home around a tree, that would be wonderful. Okay, so that's your carbon dioxide level. And then I also wanted to look at methane. Methane is another important greenhouse gas. Actually, it has been increased by man now because methane is created wherever you have rotting plants. So when you have an agricultural land, especially in USA, they found that they were blaming us for the excess of carbon dioxide, and they realized that their area, the wheat growing areas, wheat, corn, cotton areas, like they don't sit and remove, they don't burn the crop, no, they just run the tractor over the remains of the crop. And that was what was generating methane. And methane, like I said, is 20 times more powerful, because of which today USA has about 80 to 90 to 100 what you call as typhoons, right? Not typhoons. What do you call them? Twisters, tornadoes, right? Created only because of the heat of that area, created only because of methane. So today, nobody is allowed to dig up the soil, right? USA has a blanket ban on digging up the soil. That they can only have seed drills. The the seed is drilled into the soil so that methane does not escape. But then if you look at the tropical countries, every tropical country is growing rice. And rice is another contributor. Rice fields are another contributor to methane. So every year, methane levels increase wherever you have paddy fields, right? And unless we change that method of growing paddy from wet to dry, this problem is going to remain. But fortunately, nature has been able to reduce the amount of methane naturally. So where 96% of 97% of methane is just absorbed back into the soil, back into the, because it is Methane is CH4. So it is a carbon hydrogen combination. And both are required for growing of plants and trees and whatever. So therefore you'll find that that can actually, that comes down and that is maintained. But for that short period of time, methane levels go up and they add to the global warming uh, problems, right? Then, of course, hydrogen is also a greenhouse gas, but we have very small quantities. Now, another important greenhouse gas is basically, so yeah, so I'm just going to skip this, right? So, as I already told you, oxygen is found only up to a height of 120 kilometers and carbon dioxide up to 90 kilometers, right? So, as you go up, it changes. The amount of gases decrease. That is why after 3,000 meters, you need an oxygen cylinder, or I mean, not cylinder, yeah, you need, if you're climbing mountains and all, you need an oxygen cylinder. And if you go to a place from wherever you are, say if you go to Ladakh and or to Leh, which is the capital of that region, if you go to Leh, then you will not be able to do half the things what you're normally able to do at from wherever you've come, right? You may have been a sprinter in this thing. You can walk very fast, but you won't be able to do it there. So they actually advise you that you need to take things slowly, at least for a week or 10 days, till your body adjusts to the less oxygen in the atmosphere. That is why they are shorter people. They have flatter noses. They are very slow in whatever they do. We can't make fun of them. They are in living in tune with their environment, right? And we think that is why also Americans go to altitudes, high altitudes, to train for sporting events, so that their bodies then become very powerful when they come back to sea level, and they are faster and they have higher stamina levels and so on. It's only because of that. So that's basically the information that you have on this slide. Right now, water vapor in the air. Now, this is a very a topic that's not really understood, right? So, generally, we have from almost 0.1% to 4% of the atmosphere by volume of water vapor. And water vapor comes in the atmosphere only through the process of uh, evaporation, right? So, on an average, 2 to 3 molecules of in the air are about 3% is about water vapor, again depending on where you are, right? So it is extremely small in places where one which are extremely dry areas. Now the dry areas could be because of high temperatures or because of low temperature. Why because of low temperature? Any idea why low temperature will not allow so much water vapor in air? Any idea? Anyone? No idea? Okay, so the low temperature means no evaporation, right? How is the water vapor coming into the atmosphere? Is through evaporation. What is evaporation? I'm sure all of you will be able to say that. It is the change of water into water vapor on heating. So you require some temperature for the water to turn into water vapor. If your temperature is minus 15 degrees Celsius, you will find that you will have no water vapor in the atmosphere, right? So it is small in arid areas. It is, when you say arid areas, it means it is less, right? Or cold areas, or even like highlands also will have less water vapor because temperatures are low. So it's related mainly to temperature, one, and it is related to the rainfall. So some areas you don't get rainfall and therefore there is no evaporation and there are no trees. The trees, even if you have trees, you have trees without leaves, right? The cactus does not have leaves, it has only thorns, it only has a stem. So therefore, there is no release of water vapor in the air, and therefore the amount of water vapor is less. Don't think there is no water vapor. There is water vapor, but it is much less, right? So therefore, that's so. Here, this slide will explain to you that if you have warmer air, it holds more water vapor, and on the left you have winter, where the water vapor will be less. That's why winter rains in India are light rainfall, no heavy rainfall. Of course, we have the cyclones just before that, but if it rains in winter, like if you go to Delhi and the north western part of India, where you have the rains coming in, western disturbances they are called, then you'll find that rainfall is light rainfall, just enough, very good for the wheat crop and any other crops that are growing there, right? Is never heavy. But in summer, the rainfall is really heavy. The reason is higher the temperature, more the capacity of air to hold water. 4 to 8 times as much in summer, more than in winter. Okay, right. So let's move on to the next topic. So we talked about the composition of the atmosphere. Let's quickly take a look at the structure of the atmosphere. I'll just have some more water. So this is the uh, diagram for the structure of the atmosphere. So you can see some words, I'm sure most of you will recognize it, right? You have the troposphere, stratosphere, mesosphere, and thermosphere. But why I've shown you this diagram is that the circles are not actually circles, right? The distance between each layer, some layers are really thick, some are small, and it's not even around the earth. Okay, it's all like some place. Sometimes it is close to the earth, sometimes it is far away, right? So therefore, that's exactly how the atmosphere is around the earth. We think the earth is a nice round body, and the atmosphere also will be evenly distributed. It is not like that. Okay, and because of that, we also need to understand whatever else that is happening, uh, that is affecting us, is also because of this, right? So the four layers: troposphere, that is the first layer we are living in, then above that is the stratosphere, and then the mesosphere and the thermosphere. Now some books give it not as a thermosphere, they put it as the ionosphere, but that's not correct. It is a thermosphere. The thermosphere is made up of two more layers, which is ionosphere and exosphere, right? Those are the sub-layers of thermosphere. So let's begin with just the troposphere. The troposphere has an average height of 13 kilometers, contains, I already told you, 80% of the gases in the atmosphere. Now it extends to a height of 6 to 8 kilometers only at the poles. I've already told you this, and 16 to 18 at the equator. So the lower value is winter value because the air is slightly colder, and the higher value is the summer value. Okay. So these are numbers remember. Okay. And they come as statements. So they may just twist the statement a little bit, and you need to read the statement correctly and need to know that the troposphere near the poles is much closer, much denser. That's because of the extreme cold, right? And then it is a mixture of gases, right? And therefore it is called a homosphere. So that's the troposphere. It also contains dust particles and water vapor only at the lower levels, not found anywhere else. Okay. And all changes in weather take place in this layer. That again, I think you studied about in other classes. Right. Now the temperature in this layer decreases by 1 degree Celsius for every 165 meters, okay, or 6.6 degrees Celsius for 1000 meters. Okay, so that's what we call as the normal lapse rate, and it is also called as the environmental lapse rate. So what does this mean? This means that as you go up every 165 meters or 166 meters or 1000 meters, the temperature will drop by that much. So if I start off at, I am at 30 degrees Celsius from wherever I am, and as I go up, then if I go up a kilometer, that's 1000 meters, then my temperature will drop by 6.6. So the temperature will be 23.4 degrees Celsius. Correct. So that's how temperatures drop, which is why hill stations are cooler than places in the plains, right? So this is important. This is called as the environmental lapse rate. Yeah. Then the temperature at the top of this, like, so in the troposphere, as you keep going up, you reach over the equator around minus 45 degrees, sorry, minus 80 degrees, okay, and minus 45 degrees at the poles. Now at the poles, at the top of the troposphere is just 6 to 8 kilometers, so it's pretty close, right? And that temperature is important for you to note, because when you talk of global warming, it is where the air is becoming warmer due to lower temperature value. So the temperature is only minus 45 at the top of the troposphere in the polar region, right? And in the equatorial region, it's about minus 80 degrees Celsius. Okay. Then this is the most important layer. It's also called as a living layer because it has all the living things. There is no life found anywhere else, right? And the zone separating the troposphere from the stratosphere is called as the tropopause. So it's called tropopause because at this point, all tropospheric properties stop. So temperature becomes constant. So if you are at minus 80 degrees, it will remain at minus 80 degrees. If you are at minus 45 degrees, it will remain around that. But the next layer, so that's a tropopause. So everything stops here. And then you move on. So just a few kilometers, 1 or 2 kilometers only, and you go to the next layer, which is the stratosphere. Now, did you ever ask your teacher why the stratosphere is called the stratosphere? When I was in school, I thought they told me it was layered because it had layers of gases or what, I don't know. But they told me that's why you say stratosphere. But then when I got to college, then it is not because of layers. It's because the temperature is layered. So if you're at that particular height, you will have the same temperature right across. Okay, so up to a height of 50 kilometers from the Earth's surface, that means, but it's starting at 13, an average of 13 kilometers, and then it goes up to 50 kilometers, right? And so at that particular time, you'll find that what happens in the troposphere is that it, at a particular level, it has only ozone at 35 kilometers above mean sea level. So as you go up into the troposphere, you have 35 kilometers, and it's about a 5 to 8 kilometers thick, the thickness of the ozone layer, right? And most important here is that it absorbs the ultraviolet radiation, which protects the Earth. You would also have known, maybe you don't know this, that when you see temperatures here, down in the troposphere, the temperature decreases as you go up. Now here the temperature is increasing. Now why is it increasing? Is only because of the ozone layer. Because the ozone layer is absorbing the hottest layer, hottest wave of the sun's rays. And therefore you'll find that temperatures increase. So temperatures increase here, starting from around minus 80, and then they go up to the end of the top of this thing, which reaches about 0 degrees, right? So 0 degrees, I mean, there's a big jump in about from 13 to 50, you can say, how many kilometers is that? 37 kilometers. So you'll find that temperatures are increasing very fast there, right? Now, how is this significant to us? So this is significant to us because today we are talking of global warming. At the same time, we are also talking about the hole in the ozone layer. Now, how is this hole created in the ozone layer? The hole here is not really a hole. It means that instead of ozone, there is something else that is allowing the ultraviolet radiation to come through and reach the Earth's surface. And that is oxygen. So what is happening here is that we are sending up a whole lot of mainly nitrogen dioxide, because nitrogen is a gas found everywhere and it rises up, and we have planes flying in the troposphere. We have nitrogen oxides and we say NOx, okay? And we also have the CFC gases. So the chlorine in the CFC gas is just one molecule. When it goes up, it absorbs one molecule of oxygen from ozone. Ozone is O3, leaving behind oxygen. And then oxygen does not have the property to absorb the ultraviolet rays, and therefore becomes cold, right? And therefore it allows the UV rays to enter, and that is the hole. So over the years, we have been, and for this to happen, it should happen when temperatures are really low, one, and two, the ozone layer should be closer to us. So there is no hole over the equatorial region, over the tropical region. Why? Because it's pretty far off, right? It's 13 to 14 kilometers far off, one. Two, it's very hot. So therefore, the reaction does not take place. You know that for some chemical reactions, you either need heat or cool. So that is how the ozone here has been uh, sort of converted into oxygen. It allows the UV rays in, and that's how you'll find that many problems have been created. Now, does this increase the temperature or has any effect on global warming? Okay, so there is something that nobody is talking about, and that is that the ozone hole, everybody, I think recently we had a news in the paper saying ozone hole is closing over northern hemisphere, and everybody is very happy about it. But what they don't understand is one very important aspect, or rather process that's happening, and that is of stratospheric cooling. So as I said, now you have oxygen instead of ozone, and oxygen is ice cold at minus 80 degrees Celsius. Okay, because it's less than 0 degrees, 100% less than 0 degrees Celsius. So it's cold. And anything that's cold will then tend to sink down. And then it comes down over the top of the troposphere. And we have hot air coming in the troposphere from the ground, hot air coming up, right? And it comes into contact with the cold oxygen. And what will happen? Will the oxygen become hotter, or will the air that is coming up become cooler? Obviously, the air is going to become cooler. And therefore, this is actually helping us not to increase our global warming count. Once the hole closes, then global warming will happen at a very, very rapid speed. And where is all this happening? It's happening over the uh, polar region, because only under those temperatures you'll find that this is happening. Now, what happens in the polar region is that you start off with a temperature of, say, 25 degrees average from the temperate regions. Actually, it's less, it's 18 degrees Celsius from the temperate region, but it's increased, temperatures have increased to 25. And then when you reach the top of the uh, troposphere in the temperate regions, we have air moving towards the polar region. So at 6 to 8 kilometers there, where the temperature should be minus 45, you've already started off 8 degrees or 7 degrees warmer, and therefore from minus 45 your temperature increases to 45 minus 7, which is 30, 45 minus 7, 38, right? So this warmth, then we also know what's happening, because it is still cold. Minus 38 is still cold. So the air begins to come down. So when the air comes down, there's another process that happens, and the air increases in temperature, which is why at ground level, the temperatures in summer are minus 10 degrees Celsius. So as the air comes down, it is going to increase in temperature, and instead of being minus 10 degrees in summer on the ground, it is now minus 2. And ice will begin to melt when the temperatures are more than minus 4 degrees Celsius. And that is why we are having a meltdown. So the ice is disappearing mainly because of the warm air being transported from the tropical region, as well as I'll do this in detail a little later. It's just a concept because I want to talk about it now also, right? So that is what is happening, and that is why we are having an ice cap melt. So if the ozone hole closes, that means the air there is going to increase in temperature. There will be nothing to bring down the temperature, and therefore the ice melt will happen at a much faster level, right? And with that happening, you'll find globally ice water levels will also increase, right? So that's the concept you need to understand, that it is not affecting global warming. Ozone does not affect global warming unless it is tropospheric ozone. I'll do that later. Okay. But in the ozone hole is just destroying life in terms of it changes the DNA. It causes skin cancer and eye cancer. And people can definitely take steps to avoid getting this by not going out in the sunlight, especially in winter. Okay, because in winter the sun's rays are really low, and keeping away, keep yourself do the sun, put the sunscreen. In summer, at least put the sunscreen and wear special glasses and all, so that your the ultraviolet radiation. There's nothing else you can do about it. But fortunately, nature repairs it. So what's happening there is man has done nothing to repair the ozone hole. Nature is doing it. Man created the problem. Nature will solve the problem. It's taking its time, but eventually it is going to be another reason why global warming is going to increase, and that is why we need to do something very seriously about this. Right. So at the top, as I told you, it reaches 0 degrees Celsius, and you also find aeroplanes flying here, which is why you have nitrogen oxide, nitrous dioxides, NOx is here, right? And that again reacts with the, if it is NO2, then it takes in one oxygen, becomes NO3. If it is NO3, it becomes NO4, like that. It goes on. And so the oxygen, ozone has been converted into oxygen. And that one reason is also because aeroplanes fly here because it is weather free, right? They again, I'll do that a little later when I'm talking about other aspects of the atmosphere. Okay, fine. So about this, we now have the stratopause where the temperature remains 0 degrees, right? And then we move on to the mesosphere. So this is 80 kilometers above the Earth's surface. It is also temperatures start to decrease here, and this is the coldest. So from 0 degrees, it reaches minus 100 degrees at a height of 80 kilometers. So it is the coldest layer, right? It is also the layer where meteorites burn up. So there's a lot of ash in this layer, which has slowly over the years, centuries, millions of years come down, and they are mainly found in the ocean floor. So from the Pacific Ocean, they discovered there's a whole lot of ash that is not found anywhere on Earth. The rocks are not found anywhere around the Earth. And then they realized it was the ash that was coming down, because how much percentage of our Earth is water, right? Three-fourths of our Earth is water. So the ocean bottom all have this ash that has come down very slowly over centuries, right? And that is your mesosphere. Finally, so the upper mesosphere again similar to tropopause, stratopause, and mesopause. Then we have the thermosphere. So this is the biggest, thickest layer from 80 kilometers to 650 kilometers. Some books also go up to more than that. Here, there is not any air. Air is very, very less. Most important is that it is extremely hot. The temperatures are rising because the one, you don't have carbon dioxide, but you do have nitrogen, you have hydrogen, okay? And these two gases together, they, and a little bit of oxygen, at 120 kilometers you also have. So these three gases are found in the molecular state, not as a mixture of gases, and so it is called as a heterosphere. So temperatures here increase with height because the incoming solar radiation, which has a very high temperature, causes these gases to heat up individually, and that is why temperatures increase with that. They are getting ionized actually, right? And it is very high because of the ultraviolet radiation turned into heat, right? By these gases, not only just like that. So temperatures reach about 2000 degrees Celsius, and here is where ionization happens. That's why the temperature is more. So the two layers here are ionosphere and exosphere, right? So you can see the layers here. You have the ionosphere there, and the mesosphere and the ozone layer, very thin layer, right? The troposphere and so on. And here the temperatures, as how the temperature varies, okay, across the region, height and temperature features, and we go. So the lower part of the thermosphere extends from 880 to 550 kilometers. The upper, it is ionized by solar radiation, like I said, because the gas particles are actually absorbing more of the X-ray and gamma rays of the sun. Okay, ultraviolet X-ray and gamma rays. So therefore, the sun's energy at this point is really strong. Okay, so I should also mention to you that the atmosphere also protects us because we are only getting less than 0.0001% of the incoming solar radiation. We're getting a very small percentage. All the rest of it is just sent back the way it has come. Okay, which is why if you go out to space, you can see that the Earth is a brilliant, we are the brightest planet, brighter than even Venus. Venus is bright only because it's close to us, but as a brilliant planet, we are the brightest because the sun's rays are being reflected. It's like that mirror reflection, right? If you shine a torch on a mirror, then the whole room will light up. Instead of lighting a candle, if you light a candle in front of a mirror, then you'll find the dispersion of light is so much that the whole room lights up. So here is the same incoming solar radiation, 99.999% going back the way it has come, right? And therefore we are getting a very small percentage of that sunlight, right? And that is only because of the ionosphere, as well as, of course, the rest of it. More because it is absorbed there by this, and then it just disappears back into space, right? So here, that is what causes the molecules to break apart also, right? And these become electrically charged, and therefore it becomes into ions. Now, how is it important to us? This ionosphere is what is helping us to make long distance and communication possible. So when I am calling you on my mobile, right, the wavelength is, radio wave is actually going up to the ionosphere and then being reflected back by different satellites that have our servers to where we are, to where I want the call to go. So that exactly is what is happening. And this discovery is what led to the this thing of the radio, basically. First the radio, and then the radio that you use for satellite radio. Okay, so they reflect radio waves back to Earth, right? And it is also the home of auroras. So here is where you can see colors because of the different gases, and nitrogen is the this thing. So green is predominant, followed by oxygen, which is reddish, and then you have yellow and other colors for hydrogen and so on and so forth. So you have, I'll show you pictures, they're called as the aurora borealis, and or the northern lights, and the aurora australis or the southern lights, right? So this is how your radio waves are transmitted. So depending on the frequency, the top layer has the highest frequency and the lower layer has a lower frequency. That is why uh, you can listen to your shortwave anywhere on Earth, because all the satellites are located in that F layer. So we have I mean, broken down into D, E, and F. Now you may wonder, why is it D, E, and F, right? It's because A is troposphere, B is stratosphere, uh, mesosphere is C, and therefore this ionosphere alone breaks up into D, E, and F. And this is what happens during the day when the sun is around in that area. Then you can have all the layers, but at night only the F layer is there. So very high frequency, you need to have a very high frequency if you want that. So all the satellites are actually flying in that F layer. They're all roaming around in that F layer, and they are ones who are transmitting so not only satellites for your what you call for your phone, but also for the radio and for the television, right? And so any cloud cover, and then you may have some problems with TV, but your phone will work, right? And all the satellites are there, are in that layer, right? And that's the importance of this particular, uh, and that's your aurora australis. And so different colors, depending on the gas, right, that you have in the atmosphere. Is green. This is green, like waving, somebody standing there and waving a green light. That's all ionization of nitrogen. And looking at this now, when we look at a green star, we know today that it has more of oxygen. So if we see a red star, we know it has more of, oxygen. So if it has green star, then it has more of nitrogen. So we can actually find out there are stars that go between red, green, and blue, uh, shining like that. And so looking at that, we can actually even guess what the composition of the gases are there to some extent, right? So that's your total structure of the earth. You have the details of what is happening where, okay? And you have, yeah, so you can see your satellite is there, right? And the final one is exosphere. Exosphere is where the temperatures reach sometimes 1600 degrees Celsius, but there's hardly any air there, and it disappears completely and merges into space. So exosphere can go up to 1000 kilometers depending on the region, right? And that's where your International Space Station is, just above all the um, all the layers. So outside the Earth's surface, right? Your International Space Station, 330 to 410, in the F layer, close to the F layer, right? And that's where it is hanging around, right? So with that, we come through some parts of any questions? Any questions? A short topic on the air temperature. So we're going to just look at temperature. Okay, so this is a short one. Again, it's important when we are looking at how temperatures change, especially in the troposphere. Okay, so some of it we have understood maybe, but more or less there are some more new concepts here. Right. So vertical changes is what I just told you, right? As you start with the lower levels, troposphere, it decreases, and the average is around 17 degrees there. Then stratosphere, it increases from minus 50, average of minus 50 to 0 degrees. Mesosphere is from 0 to 80, minus 80, and then minus 80 to 2300 degrees as you go up to the exosphere. So these are vertical changes. But more important for us are the horizontal changes. So this diagram may be very, you know this diagram. You have torrid, temperate, and frigid zone. And you know that it has been, it is separated. Torrid zone is between Tropic of Cancer and Capricorn. And then between the tropics and Arctic and Antarctic circle, you have temperate, and then you have frigid. But more important is need to know why and how. So what is the reason why torrid zone is torrid? We also call it tropical zone, very hot, right? Temperate is warm in summer, cold in winter. Okay, it's becoming hot in summer there now, and very cold in winter. And frigid is cold throughout the year, right? So when I say cold, I mean it is, though the snow disappears, the temperatures are way below 6 degrees Celsius. So nothing grows, hardly anything can grow unless the temperature is slightly warmer than 6 degrees. Then only you have grass and lichens and things growing like that. But otherwise, you'll find that it's outside temperatures are quite cold. Cold for us because we are not living there, but not for them. For them, it's fine. Like, yeah. So that's your horizontal changes. So this is called as the heat zones. We call this as the heat zones, right? And you also need to know the latitude, the value of the latitude. The latitudes are 0 degrees, 23.5 degrees north and south. And then you have 66.5 degrees north and south. And then you have 90 degrees north and south, right? So do you know why you have these temperature changes? What is the reason for this? Does anybody here, old students, new students? Do you know why we have this change? The reason why we are having this change is mainly because of the tilt of the Earth's axis. So the Earth is not rotating along a straight axis. It is a tilted axis of 23.5 degrees. So when we created the latitudes, remember latitudes are created by man. Okay, we realize that the earth is tilted like this based on the position of some stars and the sun also based on the position of the sun actually. So when people went to the equator and took the height of the sun, especially during midday, they found that it was always 90 degrees. So when it is almost always 90 degrees, it changes a bit this way, that way on depending on the season. They also did that testing, and that's how they calculated the latitude. That's how they created the latitudes, right? So since they were all Britishers who created it, then your 0 degrees longitude was created using latitudes. And it is mainly latitudes which are important when we talk about climate. And you can see the two areas here, A and B. So the equatorial region get what we call as the vertical rays of the sun. When you say vertical rays, you need to remember that it is vertical rays of the midday sun, afternoon sun. So the afternoon sun is vertical rays, then it's going to be really hot. Whereas the oblique rays means that the rays are coming at a slant. In the afternoon, the rays are coming at a slant. So, for this, I'd like you to do a small experiment. I've talked to old students about this, but new students, if the sun is out tomorrow at 12 o'clock, just briefly go out and see where your shadow is. So you will notice that now in the month of April, your shadow is actually going to be around you. Or if you can't go out, look at the shadow of an electric pole or a tree, okay? And then keep doing this every month, and you will find that the shadow is changing, is becoming longer, and it is going in a direction. In for you now in this time, it is going. That direction is south. This is exactly at 12 o'clock noon. So the shadow is facing south. Now, the reason is because the sun is now directly over Bangalore. So your shadow will be around you. But as time passes, you go to May, June, then the sun is moving towards the Tropic of Cancer, right? And that is why the shadow is facing south. So you don't need a GPS or a compass to know directions. East and west, we know when the sun is rising and setting. North and south, you know at noon. Noon time, you just look at this thing, you know, okay, which is north, which is south, you can easily make out just by looking at your shadow. So what happens on June 21st, the sun will reach Tropic of Cancer. You know that is the solstice period. Then you have September 22nd, 23rd, when the sun is going towards equator. So sometime in August, you will notice that your shadow is again around you. And then by September, you will notice that the shadow is now behind you if you've been facing the same direction. So that's facing north, it means the sun is gone south, right? December 22nd, the September 23rd is at equator. December is the longest shadow you will have facing north. Okay. And then again, the shadow will become shorter, right? And then again, before the summer solstice, again, it will be back around you. So this changing shadow is mainly because of the revolution of a tilted earth around the sun. Remember, the tilt of the earth alone is causing the different seasons. If the earth was not tilted, so mostly in your books you will read that revolution causes seasons. But revolution of Jupiter around the sun does not cause seasons because Jupiter has just a very small tilt, 3 degrees. So the temperature stays the same throughout the year. There are no seasons like that. But Mars has 27 or 29 degrees axis. So there you will have seasons. So only if you have a tilt that the earth is tilted. So how does it work? It works like this. So here is where a small. It's of course concentrated, larger area that is there. But here, this will explain to you how it is possible for us to have seasons. So this is basically the Earth on the 21st of June, where it is located. So the rays are all coming straight parallel to each other, right? And you also have the different major latitudes shown here and that. Now what I want you to look at is this, that on the 21st of June, equator, if during making one rotation, has 12 hours of daylight equal to 12 hours of night. So you can see that it is exactly going to the center of the earth. There's a slight variation, a few minutes here and there. Tropic of Cancer has more daylight than night, and that is why it is the longest day. Tropic of Capricorn has less daylight, and therefore it has the longest night. Right? Look at Arctic Circle now. Arctic Circle has complete daylight for 24 hours. So when people say polar region, you have 6 months of polar day. It means your day starts from 1 minute and goes up to 24 hours. So for the first 1.5 months, it starts from 1 minute of polar day and goes up to 24 hours and remains for 24 hours for the next 3 months. And then after that, it comes back again. Okay, so here is where you can see the earth rotating in two places. So let me go back to that other slide. Sorry. So here is where you cannot say 6 month daylight. No, it is 6 months daylight starting from 1 minute and going up to 24 hours, being there for about 3 months. And then from 24 hours, it starts decreasing and then comes back to 1 minute again of daylight and the sun disappears. By then, the sun is in the southern hemisphere. So in the southern hemisphere, it has disappeared just that same way. So here is where you can see that northern hemisphere, of course, here the tilt of the axis is wrong. The tilt of the axis should be the opposite direction, but somehow they have tilted the axis. It's not correct. I wasn't able to get a correct diagram. I need to learn how to make these diagrams. Anyway, so we just need to understand it is the tilt of the axis that causes the amount of daylight. Now, one misconception we have is that in spite of the daylight, it's still extremely cold. Minus 10 degrees Celsius is the normal summer temperature for the Arctic and Antarctic region, right? So why is that happening? So that is happening because this is where the sun is in summer. Okay, so a camera has been fixed and it has taken a shot every hour, and you can see about 9 suns here. And you can see the sun is going down and then reaching the horizon, and then it is increasing up, right? So that is your polar day, and then it goes right around you. So here in Bangalore, the sun will rise in the east and it will set in the west. But if you're in the polar region, the sun never sets. It will just keep going around you. So how will you know which is east or west? You'll have to wait for 6 months to when the sun is setting finally. Maybe that is east. Okay. So depends on where you are. So in the North Pole, of course. And then you can also look at the stars. If you know the stars, then you can find out which is north. You can divide the entire sky can be divided into north, south, east, west, or eastern part, northern part, southern part. Southern part you can't see, of course, from the polar region. So you can divide the sky into east and west if you know your stars, if you know your constellations. Okay, so that's how it is. Now tell me, if the sun is going to be at the horizon here, what will be the temperature? So here is where, in your experience, if I look at sunlight, that's in the next one here. So that's a path of the sun basically going from, this is over the temperate regions where it is. And as you can see, it is never overhead if you're going to cross the Tropic of Cancer northwards or cross the Tropic of Capricorn southwards. It is only between this zone that you will only have the overhead sun. And what is more important here is that, yeah, in between you have equal day, equal night, right? And then you have the equinox. So in this, the slides are mainly for you to understand how the tilt of the Earth's axis is actually creating the change, what we call as day and night, right? Length of day and night right across the Earth. And also you should know the dates, right? So June 21st is summer solstice. Summer solstice, why is it called solstice? Is because it is the meaning the standing still of the sun. Sun seems to stop. So if I go to Bhopal, which is, better still, Gandhinagar, I think. Gandhinagar, Ranchi, and Kolkata are as close as possible to the Tropic of Cancer. So if I go there and if I check with my shadow there, the shadow will be directly overhead only on the 21st of June and plus or minus a few days on either side. After that, the shadow will be always facing north. If I go to Delhi, which is around 29 degrees north, the sun is always in the south. So you'll never see the I mean, you never see a shadow around you because the sun is always in the southern part of the sky. If I go to Australia, it's the opposite dates. Okay, so solstice here means that it seems that the sun is traveling to the equator, then from the equator to Tropic of Cancer, then it stops, so-called solstice. Then it comes back to the equator, I have equal day, equal night. And then it goes to Tropic of Capricorn, and then I have the winter solstice. So the terms summer and winter were used mainly because in those days, Southern Hemisphere was not really discovered. Secondly, there were very few people, even today, there are very few people living in the Southern Hemisphere, right? 90% of the population is all living in the Northern Hemisphere. Southern Hemisphere, Australia, small country, very less population. New Zealand, then you have South Africa. African countries anyway have, I mean, they are highly populated, no doubt. So that's the only part, but it's a tapering country, right? It's broad in the north, but in the south, it's a smaller country. South America, again, is a smaller land region. So the land is only 10%. 90% of the land is in the northern hemisphere. Since 90% of the population is experiencing this difference in daylight hours, which is why we have mentioned it as summer solstice. And so many Australians want to know why we should call it summer solstice when they have winter solstice, when they have winter, and the opposite. So anyway, that's how it is. So for us, we still look at it like that. Okay. So that's just to show how your change of the slanting of the axis is causing this. Okay, fine. So let's actually move to the temperature of a place. So there are several factors that cause a change in temperature. And here is where I'll explain the latitude. So what we saw from the previous slide is as you go towards the polar region, the temperature is decreasing. This is because they are receiving the direct rays of the overhead sun, which are hotter because they are concentrated and pass through a less dense atmosphere. Now, this is very important. This is why if I stand out in the sun in the morning or in the evening, I don't feel the heat of the sun. So it's not somebody switching on and switching off the heat of the sun, right? It is that the sun's rays are just passing through a thicker layer of the atmosphere. I can even look at the sun and my eyes don't hurt, right? So they say that when the sun is directly overhead, it is coming through, it is 12 times what do you call, sorry, when it is at the horizon, it is 12 times more than when it is directly overhead. So places where after 10 o'clock in the morning within the tropical region, and if they are at sea level, the temperatures begin to rise very quickly because the land becomes hot. It's the strong rays of the sun. It's coming through a thinner atmosphere, and therefore it is concentrated. Right? Also, the rays are concentrated, they're not spread out. Whereas at the horizon, it will be just the opposite. So places beyond the tropics, they only receive the slanting rays. So starting from around, so I said 66 and a half degrees, right? So 23 and a half to 66 and a half. So 66, if it is at 66 and a half degrees, it is winter. If it is at 23 and a half degrees, it is summer. So that's how they've taken the angle of the sun's rays. You do have instruments to measure the angle of the ray of the sun's rays, of stars, and so on and so forth. And using that, that's how they have found it. Finally, in the so as you go beyond the tropics, the sun is getting lower in the sky. So I'm using the word zenith. Okay, let me just go on straight to this. Yeah. So here is where I have the vertical rays of the sun, 342 watts per meter squared. So really concentrated. And if they're coming at a angle of 45 degrees, it loses it is coming at 342 watts per meter squared. But when it reaches the earth, it has lost 100 watts. So that is called as the horizon, and that is called as zenith. So within the tropical region, it is hot because the sun is at zenith, right, for a longer period of time. Okay. And as you go towards the temperate region, the sun is between 66 and a half degrees and 23 and a half degrees. So their zenith is not 90 degrees. It will be 66 and a half degrees. Depending on where they are, like in South Europe, it will be 66 and a half degrees. North Europe, it will be 23 and a half degrees, like that. And then as you go beyond, the sun is below the horizon for 6 months and above the horizon at that picture that I showed you, right? And that is why latitude plays a very important role in the temperature of a place. So as you go from the equatorial region to the polar regions, temperature decreases. So we use the word insolation. Now, why do we use the word insolation? Insolation is coined from the term incoming solar radiation. So the incoming solar radiation, like I told you, is very, very less. It is at 0.001%, where 97% of the rays are sent back. And of that 9 point, and that's how the 0.001% is how strong the rays are when they are at zenith, when compared to when it is at horizon. So therefore, in terms of temperature, even in India, as you are traveling from Kanyakumari going towards Srinagar, I won't say, I won't use, not Srinagar, Jammu, sorry. I won't use Srinagar because Srinagar is in the mountains and that's a different story. So as you're going across, you will find that your temperatures generally are going to decrease. But at this point, I should also say there is not just one factor that is responsible for how temperature changes, right? But generally, summer, you'll find Kerala always hot, Tamil Nadu always hot. Anything below south of this thing is hot. But Bangalore is an exception. And Bangalore is an exception because Bangalore is almost 900 meters above sea level, which comes to the second. So the second is the altitude of the place. Now, as we saw that most of the air is concentrated below 3000 meters. So as you go up, you will find, and the air is actually heated up from below. Now, as this heated air rises, it begins to cool, right? So sea level, the temperatures are always high than places that are located at higher level. So therefore, temperature generally decreases with increasing height. That's I've already spoken to you about this, right? at 6.5 degrees per 1,000 meters, called as the environmental lapse rate or the normal lapse rate. Now, why is temperature decreasing? Is because there is less air. So I always give the example of, take a jug of hot water, pour it into a glass and a tumbler, and another pour some water in a plate. Which one will cool faster? I think you know your answer, right? So the plate will cool faster than the glass because there is a greater surface area. Now, because of gravity, most of the air is congested and, this thing near the Earth's surface. So within that 3,000 meters or so, we have 70% of the air all found there because of gravity. And then as you go higher, then the air becomes rarer. So the distance between the air particles also is increasing because it is less air. So it doesn't mean that the air is not becoming hot. Next time you go to a hill station, you will notice that the air will be warm as long as you are in the sun. But it cools very fast as soon as you get some shade. The reason is because the molecules of air are not able to hold the moisture. Whereas in a congested, like the glass, a congested area, the air particles which are hot, they become more, what do you call, the movement is more, there's more friction, the temperature remains, right? And luckily for us, the air rises, hot air rises. And as the air rises up, then it cools again. But that is a different rate of cooling, and I won't bring that in now, but generally. So as we go up, right, for some reason, for reasons of gravity, is mainly you'll find that most of the air is concentrated. So the less air means it will cool faster, and that is why you have lower temperatures at higher altitudes. And you can see this visual. Now, the visual for noticing how temperature changes is what the natural vegetation will be like. So all the trees are found in the plains. As the height is increasing, you'll find the trees are disappearing and you'll have bushes. Then the bushes will disappear and then you have grass and then you have the ice cap, right? In fact, in India, we have right from equatorial forests starting in Kerala to the ice cap in the Himalayas. That's how we have the vegetation belt. And we have a different vegetation belt, which is the only in the Himalayan region, because our Himalayan region is made up of 3 layers, right? And that's how temperature changes with altitude, and you can see. And here again, you can see another picture here that shows you, of course, it's in feet and it's in degrees Fahrenheit, but how the shape and size of the trees will also change as you go up higher, right? And that is an indication that temperature is dropping with increase in height. Okay, I don't know if I have time. Okay, then let me just take this one also very quickly. Distance from the sea. Now, we need to know that the sea and land react differently to temperature. Land increases temperature quickly compared to the sea, and loses its temperature much quicker than the sea. And I think you would have studied this in terms of land breeze and sea breeze. So here the top picture shows you how during the day land is heating up, air is rising, and you have a low pressure created. The sea is taking its own time to heat up. The reason is because of the process of heating, which is called as convection. By the time the land, by 2 o'clock, you'll find there's a low pressure created. The sea is still cool. So there is a high pressure of air and cool air on the sea. And therefore, when you have this difference in air pressure, I told you in the beginning, the air will move from high pressure to low pressure. And that's how you have the sea breeze. Since it's coming from the sea, it's called a sea breeze, right? And that is what brings down the temperature of coastal places. So Chennai never gets temperature higher than 35 degrees, never, or any of these coastal, Mangalore. The reason is by 2 o'clock, the sea breeze will blow in and will bring down the temperature. But in Bangalore, it will continue 40, 41, Hyderabad, Delhi, because there is no sea breeze, right? Similarly, at night, what happens is that the land cools down very fast. By then, the sea has started to warm up. So anytime you go to the beach in the evening, you will find that the sea water is warm. The land will be cool, already lost its temperature, but the sea will be warm. You come back in the morning, you will find that it will be the sea will be really cold, but the land will be warm. It's only around midday or something that the sea will sort of warm up. So it still remains cool almost the whole day. It loses its heat, right? So it's cool. The land will start warming up. So at that time, there's a low pressure created over the sea, and therefore the land moves. Now, what happens in the land is that the air comes down to go towards the sea. When you have descending air, it always will be warmer. When you have ascending air, it will be cooler because the breeze comes in. When you have descending air anywhere, it will be warmer. And the best example I can give you of this is your fires that are happening in Australia, in Los Angeles, in that area, in California. The reason is because of the air that is coming down from the mountains down, and that is what causes the fires. So places near the sea have a moderate temperature. Daytime temperatures not too high, nighttime temperatures not too low, right? So we about 7 to 8 degrees Celsius. So then that's the only difference in temperature between day and night in coastal areas. Whereas in interior areas, there's no influence of the sea, and therefore daytime temperatures can go up to say 25, 40 in 40 in say in summer, and nighttime temperatures can go up down to 20. So 20 degrees difference, right? And that's how you have distance from the sea affecting the breeze. So here's another thing. Sometimes you may also have rain, but not in our region. That's mainly in Europe. Okay, right. So I think, yeah, so this is the reason I've already given to you. Okay, and interior places. Yeah. So I think I can stop here. Tomorrow I'll continue with the next topic, which is prevailing winds and pressures. Any questions? Any feedback? I'm going too fast. I'm giving you too much information. Uh, Anything? Or if you have any questions, you can think it over at night and you can ask. We can do a small session before we start the class tomorrow. So have a good evening and be safe.